we go. All right. So. So I think we left off. Sure. Okay. So is this where we left off, I think, right? So we're done with protozoan.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, guys, any questions so far?
Nope.
All right, I was finally able to get last night's meeting to process completely for some reason, so I uploaded that. That should be up. I'll record tonight's, I'll process that tonight, and then I will post the last Unit 5 test and your lab practical. All right, for the lab practical, don't get nervous. It's going to be just on lab identification. There's not much more I can test you on since you didn't actually have lab. You know, I can't test you on your streak plate ability or your gram staining ability, unfortunately. Well, fortunately for you guys, but not for me. But anyway, we'll get started. So I just texted Bob. Yeah, it's my fault. I had to change the address. It wouldn't, I don't know. I gave up. All right, so I want to get into hemoflagellates. So hemo is going to mean blood. Flagellates are going to mean these are going to have flagella. They're going to be able to move, but they're going to be more like eel-shaped, all right? There's going to be injected into your blood from some kind of intermediate vector. And I think I mentioned yesterday, a lot of these vectors are not even going to be affected by the the parasite or the rickettsia or whatever, all right? So these are obligate parasites that live in the blood and tissue of the human host. And please realize by obligate, we mean they can't live on their own. They have to go from host to host. And they're going to be transmitted from one vector to the other as a vector. Like let's say it's Anopheles female mosquito. She's going to bite somebody, pull on the malaria, the Plasmodium into their bloodstream. They're going to re-inject into the next person to take a blood meal from. Can cause life-threatening and debilitated zoonosis. Zoonosis, as we mentioned, was something that is animal-borne. Right. I'm going to talk a little bit about malaria, and please remember, the malaria, they are going to be, the Plasmodium are going to be injected into the blood. They're going to go to the liver. They're going to change merozytes and sporozytes. They're going to go to your red blood cells. They're going to reproduce in there, and the red blood cells are going to erupt. All right, and that's why it gives these people anemia and all kinds of disorders and cause anemia, blood clotting, some major factors. We'll talk about this. All right, spread in specific tropical regions by blood-sucking insects that serve as intermediate hosts. And we used to have this in the United States between the U.S. and Mexico when we did the Panama Canal, but we were able to wipe out the entire population down there. So as of right now, we don't really have a problem with it. These have complicated life cycles and undergo morphological changes. We're going to go over a little bit of it, but I will not expect you guys to remember the entire process of malaria. I'm just going to give you the key points. Okay. Categorized according to cellular and infective stages. So the hemoflagellates, we talked about these before when we were talking about some of the other protozoan, and this is the same chart as before. So just realize it's done, mastigo is going to be the suffix, and the prefix is going to tell you a little bit about as far as where the flagella are. Okay. We're going to talk about Leishmania, Baghdad boils, and brucei is going to be traveled by the tsetse fly. And cruzi are going to be the kissing bug, and this is when we mentioned the other day, where this will actually land on your lip or your eye, where the mucous membrane areas, or the the skin is very, very thin, so they're able to permeate that, draw blood, and as they draw blood, they're going to be defecating, and then as they, they defecate, and then you're going to scratch that puncture site and put the protozoan, or the microorganism into your bloodstream with that. So Trypanosoma species are distinguished by their infective stage. Trypomastogote is elongated spindle-shaped cell with tapered ends, eel-like mobility. So these are the hemoflagellates, right? So there's two types, right? And there's usually always one of these questions on a micro exam or board exams. They always ask you this. So Trypanosoma brucei is African sleeping sickness, and we'll realize with this, this has a very systemic. It goes through the body, causes brain and heart damage. As these Trypanosoma, they start reproducing in the body, and they start reproducing in the heart muscle and the brain, and they form these nodules, cause major, major illness. Right? Cruzi, the kissing disease, is Chagas disease. It's endemic to Central and South America. So we're not really worried about here unless we're traveling, right? And remember, if you get bit by this, unless you're living in that country for 2 or 3 weeks or a month, you're not even going to realize anything's going on until you come back to the US, and then you'll start having some of the signs and symptoms. All right. So the flagellates will start with Chagas disease. All right, this is the kissing bug. And this is the one that's going to land on you while you're sleeping, right? Bite you, and then you're going to self-inoculate yourself by moving the defecated matter into your bloodstream. So possums and armadillo are the primary reservoir. All right, we're not the primary reservoir. We just happen to be an intermediate, just like with Lyme's disease. The deer and the mice are usually the vectors, but we become an incidental vector. We get bit, none of their primary. Transmission occurs through bites of insects in the genus Tritoma. So just realize if they're like Chagas disease or kissing bug disease, this is what they're talking about, cruzi, Trypanosoma cruzi. Kissing bug feeds preferentially from blood vessels in the lips, because remember, I don't know if you guys can see me in the video, but it's very, very thin on the lips or on the eye. Right? They'll get right around the conjunctiva, and they'll bite in that area. Right. So here we see the possum and the armadillo. These are really their primary vectors. Right? The revelid bug is what it's called, right? Or kissing bug. Infection occurs when bug feces is inoculated into the cutaneous portal. So they're going to puncture you, they're going to defecate, and then as you scratch it, you're wiping that feces or defecation into your bloodstream. So you're technically inoculating yourself. This is not carried in their bloodstream. It's actually carried in the digestive tract. And as you wipe it into that wound before it completely clots or whatever, you're going to be spreading it to yourself. So that would be something they might ask you, like, one is transmitted directly by the vector, the other one is in the digestive system, and you inoculate yourself. All right, so you have a local lesion, fever, swelling of lymph nodes, spleen and liver as this starts developing. Right? And if you look here, see hemoflagellates, so they're really more eel-shaped, all right? And if you took a blood sample, you would not be able to miss this thing, because it literally, as it grows, is bigger than a red blood cell. And those of you took A&P or human bio, you looked at those red blood cells, they're really large under the microscope. Those biconcave discs, they're relatively large. These things are swimming around in that, so they're really easy to see. So you just go through this. It's just telling you trichosomes become effective, the hindgut of the kissing bug, all right, and they're deposited in their feces. So then the GI tract, scratching introduces it, so you're going to actually scratch that into your wound, all right. So these travel to the blood, penetrate cells, and transform into non-flagellated form. So they go in, flagellated, they start reproducing, and their non-flagellated form. They multiply by binary fission inside the cells, all right, and then they start floating around in the body, right? And then as they start developing in the heart, brain, and lung, they start causing some major problems. So this person's bit on the eye, right? And there's the bug itself, really, really large, much bigger than a mosquito. So you get bit, and then you just think it's swollen from the bite, shigoma, it's called, right? Generalized stage, right? And then you have an asymptomatic primary stage. So this kind of goes away. People don't really think anything of it. And then as the congestion and heart failure starts happening, they are able to hopefully trace it back. So chronic inflammation occurs in the organs, especially the heart and brain. And as you can see, these are starting to grow in the cardiac muscle. Right? So it starts affecting those intercalated discs, all right? So the heart has a lot of trouble contracting, because remember those intercalated discs are what propagates a signal from heart muscle, heart muscle, heart muscle. All right, so these start really jamming that up. And you can imagine what would happen if your heart had trouble, the muscle had trouble contracting in a sequential pattern. So the heart may be pumping, but it's not pumping sequentially, the chambers, and it's very intermittent, can cause some major problems, either systemically, if it's in the left atrium, or in the right atrium, it might have trouble circulating the blood from the heart, the pulmonary system, reoxygenating, and then pumping it back out. All right, so let's talk a little bit about African sleeping sickness. Now this is different because if you think about African sleeping sickness, it got its name because people were sleeping, but the problem is they're not sleeping at night, they're sleeping at night, but they're also sleeping during the day because of all the neurological damage that's happening in the brain. So it's spread by tsetse flies. So if they ask you, Trypanosoma brucei or African sleeping sickness is spread by, they'll say Anopheles mosquito, they could say shovelet bug or something. The answer is going to be tsetse fly. That's what they're looking for. So there's two strains. It really depends on the region. All right, Gambesi or Rhodesian, like a Rhodesian redback. So it just depends on whether which side of the continent you're on, the west side or east side. Right. Biting of the fly inoculates skin with the trymastogotes, which multiply in the blood, damage the spleen, lymph nodes, and then the brain. All right, so the major thing they usually ask is, obviously it's going to damage the spleen or lymph because it's in the bloodstream, right? It's going to be something foreign, and your liver and spleen are going to, your spleen's going to be getting rid of all of your old red blood cells or anything that's defective. These are kind of jamming up the works in your lymph nodes. If these get into your bloodstream or in your lymph fluid through those lymphatic vessels, are going to go to your lymph nodes. And these are relatively large. They're going to start jamming up or plugging up the lymph nodes. And we'll see coming up, we're talking about filarial worm from the Anopheles females is going to cause elephantitis. It really starts jamming up the lymph nodes. And if the lymph nodes get jammed up, that lymphatic fluid can't travel back to the left or to the heart. All right. All right, so here, if you look, remember I said that these things are going to be huge. They're literally larger than the red blood cells, and these are eel-shaped. They're flagellated hemoflagellates. They're actually floating around, and they're relatively big. All right. African sleeping sickness has 3 stages if it's left untreated. Right? So in this country, if you're in a populated area in Africa, they're going to know what it is. They're going to be able to treat it. It's the people that are in the rural sections who either don't believe in healthcare or have no access to good healthcare. They're going to have the major problems. So the site of the fly becomes a lesion with dead tissue. It becomes very necrotic. Parasites in the blood trigger fever. Lymph nodes swell as these things are jamming it up. All right, and headaches. All right, we're diminishing the blood supply to the brain, one, and if it crosses the blood-brain barrier, it can cause some major neurological disorders. Remember, these headaches are really not so much compressing the cortical region. It's when they cause that swelling and inflammation, starts stretching that pia mater and dura mater, right? Causes that stretching. Meningoencephalitis, right? So we have some inflammation of the meninges, and pressure against the brain tissue can cause some major problems. All right, this is what also causes that sleepiness. They actually kind of go into like a semi-coma type condition. Death can occur within a few months of disease onset. Right. All infections characterized by cyclic waves. Right. These are going to have those cyclic waves. And remember again, as they have these cyclic waves, it's usually the parasite is going to change its antigens. All right. So our immune system, if we try to attach antibodies to it, it's going to change those antigens. So we have to continuously make new antibodies to it from our B cells. The host immune system is unable to clear the infection, right? And I wrote down here in blue for you guys, Trypanosoma brucei constantly changes its surface glycoproteins so that it can evades. It should be evades, not invades, the host immune system. So whenever you see any kind of fluctuating pattern, remember that the organism is changing its glycoproteins or its surface proteins. So we have to make new antibodies to tag it using the complement system, if you guys remember that at all. Right. It's just showing you this life cycle. So just kind of remember, all right, Trypanosoma brucei African sleeping sickness is literally blood-borne because it's in the salivary glands. Right? Cruzi is going to be in the GI tract. So these are carried via the blood and lymph to other sites, right? These also replicate by binary fission in the body fluids, right? And then they're going to start jamming things up. And then another insect's going to come along, take a blood meal. These are floating around in the blood. They just keep transmitting this cyclically throughout the population. And so these are harbored in mammals, and this is really all mammals. So it's not just going to be the possum and the armadillo like cruzi, right? This is going to be harbored by all mammals. So there's a larger reservoir population. So chronic disease symptoms are sleep disturbances, tremors, paralysis, and coma, all right? So when you see that, you're thinking, well, wait a minute, sleep disturbances, tremors, paralysis, and coma, all right, that's neurological. You know, something is compressing the cortex, and that's from all that inflammation in the meninges, and dura mater, and pia mater. And then if we wanted to test for this, they're literally, we saw how big they were in the picture, right? So they'd be in the blood, they could be in spinal fluid if they're in the nervous system, but they'd be circulating around, all right? And obviously they're going to be in the lymph nodes through our lymphatic fluid, going through those afferent vessels, getting jammed up in the lymph nodes, and they're not even able to make it out through the efferent part of the lymph nodes, right? So treatment before neurological involvement. All right, so the issue is once it becomes neurologically involved, all right, it wouldn't happen right away, but if we don't treat it earlier, if it isn't treated early and it gets into the meninges and those neurological disturbances start, there's really not a way to get any of these medications or antimicrobials to the brain because of the blood-brain barrier. Right? And control involves eliminating the tsetse fly. Right? So you know, that's the only really way we can get rid of that, because we can't kill all of the reservoirs. Right? We can't kill all mammals. Right? We have to be able to kill the actual vector itself, which here is the tsetse fly. Leishmania, when you see this, it's going to cause major skin damage. So it's going to be in the skin, and we're going to see a picture coming up of what they call a Baghdad boil, but these are very, very elevated and very, very brown. These are carried by sandflies. Cause Leishmania or Asis, right? Endemic in parts of the tropics and subtropics. Wild and domestic dogs and small rodents are common hosts. So whatever this sandfly is going to be biting. Leishmania have two developmental stages. Amastogotes multiply in the host macrophages and monocytes. So this is another one. All right, this is able to get into the macrophages and monocytes. Right? So they're multiplying right in these white blood cells, and once they're in our white blood cells, the immune system thinks this is normal. They're not even going to know they're there, so they're able to multiply without being hindered by our immune system. These develop extracellularly within the vector's gut. And then showing you here. Sandfly takes meal of blood containing a mastogote. So that's going to be from some kind of mammal, as it takes a blood meal. Right? They're going to pass it on to this human host. All right. The mastogote transforms in the promastogote in their midgut. Right. These multiply again by binary fission in the midgut and migrate to long, flexible mouth tube of the fly. So they start developing in the midgut, and then they migrate to the mouth, right? And then the sandfly re-injects it into the next host. Let's see here, right here, it's in the macrophages multiplying. So it kind of, the macrophage engulfs it, tries to kill it, but it can't because this thing is huge. Even our enzymatic vacuoles and things can't get it. All right, so they start going through binary fission here. They produce so many, they burst, right? Now they're in our bloodstream. All right, so if we were the host or the mammal's the host, now these are in the bloodstream, they get taken in by the sandfly. This goes to the midgut, to the mouth tube, and then it gets re-injected into the next host. Vicious cycle. Right? There's not a whole lot that our macrophages and monocytes can do. Right? Same with us and other mammals. All right. So Leishmaniasis is zoonotic transmission among mammalian hosts by female sandflies that require a blood meal to produce eggs, endemic to the equatorial regions. And these things are actually smart enough that they know when to come out, depending on the heat. They'll know when more mammalian hosts are going to be out, so they know when to start feeding on whatever mammal they come in contact with. So it's just kind of showing you here human or mammalian host, right, and then how these can float around and they get transmitted from cell to cell. And that's what Baghdad boil or cutaneous. All right, so that's a very, very elevated brown lesion. All right, so you shouldn't be able to miss that. It's not like a basic mosquito bite or rubbed bug or anything else. It's going to be very, very large. All right, so migrates, the puncture site migrates, it gets very, very large. Look how infected that looks. So that's a Baghdad boil. Localized ulcerated sore. And there's other, S1 is a skin or mucous membrane infection of the head or chronic infection. And what we really don't want is, if we can catch it in time here, right, we have a possibility of getting it. It's when it starts spreading or it's untreated, right? Systemic. So we said once it gets into the systemic system, as it starts changing things, we have high intermittent fever, weight loss, enlarged spleen, liver, and lymph nodes as these things start jamming up anything that's dealing with the blood. This poor guy put this in. It was like the worst picture I could find just to see. So this obviously was bit and untreated, and just look at how much that thing has spread. All right, let's talk a little bit about malaria, right? Because this actually is relatively common, and a lot of people die from malaria. And it's really something that we have trouble controlling. I know that UB is working on vaccine for this. I don't know if it's been effective or not. And once again, we really can't, unless we get rid of all the female Anopheles mosquitoes, which would be great, or if we can sterilize the males or find some way of diminishing the population, this is going to be a major, major problem. Right? We're not talking, this isn't pathophysiology too, so we're not going to be really talking about sickle cell disease, which where the red blood cells rupture before these can multiply in the red blood cells. We were talking about that, but that's how sickle cell really works with this. Right. So these are locomotor organelles in the trophozoite stage. All right, so these don't have any really, they don't really have any flagella. Right. So they alternate between sexual and asexual places and between different animal hosts. Right. All right, and the female Anopheles mosquito really isn't affected by this. All right. So most form of specialized infective bodies that are transmitted by arthropod vectors, right, can be transmitted by food, water, or other means. Right? But when we're talking about Plasmodium, when we're talking about malaria, toxoplasma, it's going to be really, when we're talking about the mouse and the cat, toxoplasmodia, and cryptosporidium. This is going to be shed in urine, sometimes feces, and this really goes into the water supply. What we're talking about in the 1990s, I think in Milwaukee, they had this, and it infected the entire water supply. And a lot of people that were immunologically diminished got very, very sick from this. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about this and the different stages of the Plasmodium and the mosquitoes. But as far as I'm concerned, I really just want you to know the cycle with malaria as far as going to the liver, and then it changes shape, then it goes to the red blood cells, and then it gets re-picked up by another mosquito. All right, so infected form is characterized by a complex of organelles at their apical end. And we'll see a picture of this coming up. So these are parasites of animals. The life cycle involves two types of host. Right? Skenogeny is a major feature of their life cycle. Multinucleate, right? So there's going to be more than one nucleate. Sconce form before the cell divides. Schizogeny is asexual reproduction by multiple fission, found in some protozoa, especially parasitic sporozotes. So just kind of remember skenogeny. When this goes into for malaria, when it gets into the liver, it's going to change shape. That's all that I really care that you know about. So if you ever come across skenogeny or like schizophrenia, so that prefix there just means multiple or different. Right? So when you see that word, kind of look for a choice where that would tell you some kind of a change in morphology is usually the way to remember that. Or if it comes up again and, 3 years down the road and you don't remember skenogeny, just think of schizophrenia. Okay, just think of change in shape or cell, and then you should be able to find whatever answer they're looking for you guys. Right. So we'll talk a little bit about malaria because I know that usually there's questions on this. All right. And like I said, it's not a major problem in this country, but if you're traveling or one of your patients has traveled somewhere south or even in India or some areas where there may be Anopheles mosquitoes around, it's always a possibility. And then we'll just talk a little bit about the signs and symptoms. So if they give you a case study, you'll know kind of what they're gearing towards. Right. So Plasmodium is the causative agent of malaria. So they're gonna, they'll ask you causative agent of malaria, and they'll give you like tsetse fly or sandfly, or they'll give you something. Just kind of remember it is Plasmodium falciparum, vivax. All right, these are usually the two most virulent. Right. So there's 4 species cause most infections. Falciparum, all right. You guys remember falciform ligament, maybe from A and P, that kind of connected the liver to the aorta in embryology. So this has to do kind of with the liver where it's multiplying, but that's how it got its name. Vivax, ovale, or Malariae. So it's always going to be P for Plasmodium. Right. Plasmodium knowlesi is emerging health pathogen, not very common, but it's becoming more and more prevalent. And unless you're working maybe at ECMC or the VA, you might see some of this coming up. Right. So malaria is endemic throughout the tropics and subtropics. Right, so if they're not sleeping with mosquito nets on, or if they're not sleeping or have nets on or full clothing and they got bit by this, that female is going to be re-injecting the infective agent into the blood supply of whatever the human host is. Right? So Anopheles mosquitoes are the vector for Plasmodium, and just kind of remember in the back of your head, it's the female, right? Plasmodium life cycle has 3 prominent stages. Right. It's here from, this is from Pearson. It's a really good pictorial of it, but like I said, I'm not going to expect you guys to remember all that. It's not that important, I don't think. So just kind of remember, if they give you a case study, you know, patient was traveled to wherever. So you're going to think of one of these regions south of the equator, all right, where the temperature is warm enough for these mosquitoes to live and propagate. So these are obligate intracellular sporozoans. So remember, these can't really live on their own. They have to be passed from mosquito to mosquito, mosquito to host, and then the other mosquito is going to pull that up from a host and just reinfect the humans or other mammals. Right. Female Anopheles mosquito is the primary vector. You can get this from blood transfusions, and this is also mother to fetus. All right, so it also has a vertical transmission. Remember, vertical transmission is mom is passing this to the placenta. Right, but this is astounding: 300 to 500 million new cases each year, 2 million deaths each year. And these statistics are probably about 6 years old, so I am going to probably think it's a little bit on the low side. And just think about this, there's 2 million deaths each year. Now imagine if, you know, we're all adults. Now imagine if it was a smaller child that had this, all right? Where their red blood cells are rupturing all the time, causing major problems. They're gonna not be able to grow very quickly, failure to thrive, and other issues are gonna be happening with the children. Much more prone to die from this than a full-grown adult. Right. So here's just kind of malaria has 2 distinct phases. So just kind of keep this in the back of your mind. The asexual phase is in the human host. Infected female mosquito injects asexual sporozoites, right, which localize the liver, then undergoes scanogeny, right, generating numerous merozoites, which enter circulation in 5 to 16 days, depending on the species. So the mosquito is injecting it here. The bloodstream is going to your liver, right, infecting your hepatocytes, all right, and then it's in the cell, it's multiplying and changing. Now it releases all of these, right, into this. It goes into your blood supply, and that's when it goes into your red blood cells. Right, so that was the asexual phase. Sexual phase, mosquito host draws infected red blood cell, fertilizes, forming diploid cell, which form sporozoites in the stomach. All right, then they go to the hindgut, and then they go back up into the throat, to the esophagus of the insect. This probably isn't going to play. So right. So Plasmodium, symptoms include episodes of chills, fever, sweat, anemia, and organ enlargement. All right, so that's going to, if they give you a case study, that's always going to be key. They're going to have episodes of chills and fever, sweating, anemia, and organ enlargement. So think about this for a minute. You know, every 2 to 3 days, as, let me go back here for a second, just so they give you a case study on this. All right, so mosquitoes injecting in here, goes to the liver, multiplies in your hepatocytes, all right? Then it leaves, all right? And then it goes to your red blood cells, all right? So we have ring trophocytes are growing in the red blood cells, all right? Then they literally rupture the red blood cells, all right? And this happens cyclically. So it could be 48 to 72 hours as this happens, right? So every 48 to 72 hours, these are going to be multiplying here, right? Ring trophocytes are there. Then they're going to rupture the red blood cell. So that person's going to go through periods of anemia, right? So, you know, your spleen is supposed to filter out these red blood cells every 120 days, all right? But if you're infected with this Plasmodium, you know, whatever species or genus and species it is, it's going to be rupturing your red blood cells every 48 to 72 hours. So we can pump out as much erythropoietin we want in the kidney, all right, to have our bone marrow make more red blood cells. But at some point in time, the body is not able to make enough red blood cells constantly, right? So they're going to be anemic, right? And just think about how taxing this is on your body to constantly reproduce red blood cells over and over again. So symptoms occur every 48 to 72 hours. Intervals as red blood cells rupture. Interval depends on the species. So they'll give you a case study. Somebody was traveling, you know, somewhere in those areas that I showed you, all right, and they developed fever, chills, anemia. They were feeling very, very tired. They would spike a fever every couple of days. That's from the inflammatory process and your body's reaction to these parasites. All right. Falciform is the most malignant type, highest death rate in children. So diagnosis by presence of trophocyte in the red blood cells. Those are those ring-shaped trophocytes in the red blood cells. So we'd go take a blood sample, put it on a slide, observe the red blood cells, and you literally see these in the red blood cells. All right, there's increasing drug resistance. Chloroquine and methylquinine are there. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of quinine from tree bark. It's still used. It's still relatively effective. Let's talk a bit about coccidian parasites. These are zoonotic and domestic animals and birds. So remember, domestic animals, when you're thinking about this, it's going to be, you know, your hamsters, your cats, dogs, birds, whether they're domesticated or wild, all right? You know, some people, you know, have reptiles, which is freakish, or snakes or whatever, and not going to be that part of, not going to be part of it. All right. Toxoplasmia gondii is a causative agent of toxoplasmosis. Right? All right, so remember, toxoplasmosis is what we really don't want pregnant women to be around because it has vertical transmission component. All right. One of the world's most widely distributed parasites. Wild and domestic mammals and birds are the major reservoir. All right. So if they give you a question on this, the key is going to be cats are the definitive host. All right, well, they would be the last host. So what's going to happen is wild and domestic mammals and birds are major reservoir. So your cat, unless it stays in the house all the time, or if you have a mouse from the outside that gets into your house, your cat's not going to be getting this. All right, so cats are the definitive host, which means they're the final host. All right. And the cat is going to release this in the litter box. Mom is going to breathe this in or consume it, right? Infection due to consumption of undercooked meat containing the parasite. Ingestion or inhalation of contaminated soil can also occur. This is where we worry about pregnant mothers changing a litter box, she could inadvertently inhale some of the contamination from the cat litter. Right. So it's an intracellular Apicomplexan parasite with extensive distribution. So it's very, very widely distributed within domestic animals or wild animals or field mice or whatever it happens to be. Lives naturally in cats that harbor oocytes in the GI tract. So the cat is going to be eating, or still picking this up from the soil. It's living in their GI tract. They're going to be excreting it, and then we're going to either get it from eating undercooked meat, so it's going to be infected in their muscle tissue, or it gets excreted and we consume it, somehow gets out of the GI tract into feces. Right. Acquired by ingesting raw meats or substances contaminated by cat feces. Right. So it's rare that it's going to cause a major problem. So mom might be more susceptible to this because she's pregnant, her body is taxed, her immune system might be a little bit taxed due to the pregnancy. So fever-producing illness combines with other symptoms. Usually it's self-limited infection. So usually our body will take care of this, you know, not immediately, but it might take a while. Our body usually is going to be able to take care of this. So macrophages, monocytes, our complement system should be able to tag this. Our T cells should be able to go in and do something with it. Toxoplasmosis is more severe in two populations, right? So this is going to be the immune compromised AIDS patients, right? Or fetuses. Transplacental or vertical transmission of protozoan can cause abortion, stillbirth, and various birth defects. This is generally what they look for when they give you a case study. It's going to be something, a pregnant mother, and you're going to figure out, you know, what are they, in the case study, always read that and say, what are they telling me? What are they looking for? Or what part of that case study means nothing? Like they'll give you some sentence in there that doesn't mean anything. Right? Most cases of toxoplasmosis go unnoticed except in the fetus or AIDS patients who can suffer from brain or heart damage. So most of us, unless we have AIDS or you're pregnant, you're probably not going to be affected by this. It's going to go unnoticed. You know, it usually should be self-limiting, not going to be a problem. All right. So Cryptosporidium, when we talk about this, it's usually always going to be water supply is going to be the vector or the reservoir for it. All right. So it's an intestinal pathogen. So you're going to be consuming this. It's going to be living in the GI tract. Infects a variety of mammals, birds, and reptiles. Exists in tissue and oocyte phases. Right. So yeah, in the 1990s, there was 370,000 cases in Milwaukee due to contaminated water. So filtration required for removal. And literally when this happened, Milwaukee had to completely replace their entire water filtration system because it was so bad. They just had to do a huge project and replace their entire water system, filtration system. All right. Causative agent is Cryptosporidium enteritis. So remember, entero is always digestive. Itis is going to be inflammation. So Cryptosporidium enteritis, once thought only to infect livestock and poultry. So when this happened in Milwaukee, they couldn't figure out, like, how in the world did this get into the water supply? All right. So, you know, it could be runoff from a farm possibly for poultry. But they're thinking, well, how did the livestock get infected, the poultry get infected? How did it travel from farmland all the way into the water supply? Or they thought, well, you know, maybe there was a human host who had it, and through the septic or through the sewer lines, it got somehow in the water supply. So they really still don't know how it happened. Humans can carry the parasite asymptomatically. Right? Infection usually results from drinking contaminated water. So, like I said, I don't mean to be scary, guys, but unless you know the water source is good, please always boil your water or run it through like a ceramic RV filter, or at least chlorinated or iodine, right, if you're at least at all concerned. Fecal oral transmission can occur, so this can be excreted in the GI tract and picked up through oral fecal route. Causes severe diarrhea, accompanied by headache, muscle pain, cramping, fluid, and weight loss. So get this, classic symptoms of flu or food intoxication from something, right? Hopefully you're gonna just be drinking a lot of fluids, resting, and it should be self-eliminating. Chronic disease indicator of HIV positive individual has AIDS. Right? So it's another one of those. We talked about Giardiasis jejunum and Kaposi sarcoma and this, with Cryptosporidium. They're gonna notice, well, if you have this, we can pretty much be assured that if you can't get rid of this, or if your immune system can't handle this, it may be indicative that you have HIV or AIDS, or diminished CD4 cell count, or your immune system is diminished or underproducing, right? So here's just showing you ingestion of the oocytes. And usually oocytes, when you see this, kind of think of cysts or eggs, all right? Gives rise to sporozoites. So you're gonna consume the oocyte, sporozoites. And right here, it's showing it attaching, those are your microvilli in here, right? So it's literally attaching to your brush border, those microvilli, which are there for surface area. It causes gastroenteritis, right? So stomach, intestinal inflammation, headache, sweating, vomiting, abdominal cramps, and diarrhea. So like I said, this is gonna mimic a lot of different things. But if your immune system's not able to get it, you're gonna suffer from much more chronic, persistent diarrhea. So even flushing this out may not be enough. Okay, guys, let's talk a little bit about worms. All right, so Helminths. So when you see Helminths or Helminths, this means worms. So we're talking about roundworms, pinworms, tapeworms, things like that. So Helminths are macroscopic multicellular eukaryotic worms. So number one, the majority of all of these you can literally see with the naked eye, right? And when we talk about pinworms or roundworms, just like if your dog or cat has them, very similar to what's in the humans, right? So these you can see with the naked eye, and these are eukaryotic, all right? So these things are very, very large, right? So if you're thinking worm infection, some kind of fluke or parasite, if you said a CBC with differential, just realize your eosinophils, all right, are going to be elevated, possibly your basophils with the inflammatory process. So these life cycles are complex. So sometimes they're going to shed parts of the worm, or sometimes they're going to be they're going to be shedding off eggs, right? Or sometimes they just shed off little tiny pinworms. You pick them up with your nails. Kids pick it up with their nails as they scratch the end of the rectum, and then they re-inoculate themselves or someone around them. All right, intermediate hosts are often needed to support larval stages. All right, so intermediate host might be from us or some other animal. They're going to excrete the cyst or part of the worm. Another animal's going to pick it up. All right, so we're talking about Taenia stagnum or these other tapeworms. It might be in the pig or the cattle, in their muscle tissue, and we don't cook that completely. We're going to consume that, all right, and digest it. It's going to start hatching in our. We'll talk about this. Right? Adult worms are either dioeciduous or monociduous. All right, so dio means 2, monociduous is 1. And remember, These worms can either be hermaphroditic, right, where they don't need another partner to replicate, or that can be through sexual reproduction. So that is a possibility too. So we'll talk about cestodes, which are roundworms, trematodes, and nematodes, right? Just the difference in the segments. So just realize there's going to be some are going to be roundworms or flatworms, depending on how you classify them. Okay. So just a little survey of Helminths parasites. These adults are large, multicellular animals with specialized tissue and organs. All right, so these can literally, they have specialized organs. So they may just be swimming or living in your GI tract, just absorbing the nutrients that you consumed through them and being able to digest them on their own. So you're just finding your GI tract a really great place to live and hang out because food is just shipped in all the time, right? In the GI tract, they're just swimming around. So adult worms mate and produce fertilized eggs that hatch. Larvae then mature in several stages to adults. Right. So the adult worms are mating and producing fertilized eggs in your GI tract, all right? And then they produce larvae. But sometimes these larvae can leave the GI tract, the digestive tract. They get into your capillary beds. They'll literally go to your lungs, right? Then you cough them up. Either spit them out or swallow them, and they just start the whole process all over. So the sexes may be separate, left out B, all right, or hermaphroditic, all right. So they can either be male and female, or they can be both. Right? Adulthood and mating occur in the definitive host. So remember, if we're the definitive host, definitive is the end stage host, where they're traveling around. They want to be in the definitive host because they can reproduce in there, give off offspring, and that's how they have survival of their species. They're in a definitive host, casting off their gametes or children or cysts or larvae or whatever. They're just hoping someone else picks them up and they have a new host. They can propagate the species. Larvae occurs in the intermediate host with these. All right, so the definitive host is, they're going to be producing, and the definitive hosts are going to be shedding off whatever it is, and they're going to pick up eggs or larvae they develop in the intermediate host. The intermediate host excretes them. We pick them off, and now we become the definitive host. Right? If it's a transport host, experiences no parasitic development. So there are animals that will pick these up and just transport them from one area to the other, and they have no parasitic, they don't stay in that host. They don't like it. They don't want to become the definitive host, and they're just transporting from point A to point B. All right, so there's 4 basic patterns of life and transmission. All right, so these are probably what you may have heard of before. So there's A, B, C, and D here. So A, right, the worm develops in the intestine. Egg is released with feces into the environment. Eggs are ingested by a new host and hatch in the intestine. So this, we're consuming it. It's living in our GI tract. Right? We excrete it. Someone else picks it up. They digest it. All right, and then it starts the whole cycle all over again. All right. Cycle B, when we start talking about hookworms and things like that. So the worms mature in the intestine. Eggs are released by feces. Larvae actually hatch. They're living in the feces. They hatch. They develop in the environment. Right? Infection occurs through skin penetration by larvae, like hookworms. So people are walking around. And this can happen down south, or you're walking around without shoes, or you've got a cut in your foot. And these can actually burrow into your skin, get into your bloodstream, and they migrate to the intestine. Right? Because obviously this is not where your intestines are. So these actually, they get in the tissues, they literally migrate up into your GI tract. All right? And their mission is to set up in your GI tract. They're hoping they're going to mature there, produce larvae, and then you excrete them out in your feces. So we'd have to have relatively unsanitary conditions or somewhere where the feces is getting into the soil, someone steps on it. So, you know, we're hoping that this doesn't really ever happen, but that's the life cycle of it. All right. Cycle C is the one that we should be a little bit worried about. The adult matures in the human intestine, eggs are released into the environment, eggs are eaten by grazing animals. So this is really an intermediate host. Larvae form and cysts in the tissue. All right. If it's in humans, we're the definitive host, we're the final host. All right, eating animal flesh that's infected. So it's excreted out. The cow may consume it. Somehow it's in the human feces got into grass or the pasture, or whatever, the cow's consuming it. They eat it, the eggs, it gets encysted in their muscles. So it's literally growing in their muscle tissue. If we consume that meat and we haven't cooked it to the proper temperature, we consume it, now we have these worms in our GI tract. Because they're gonna get through, not all of them, but most of them are gonna get through the stomach, into the duodenum, and then they get released in there. Right. Cycle D, eggs are released from humans. Humans are infected through ingestion of direct penetration by larvae phases. So we're going to eat the animal flesh. It's in us. The organs it goes to our organs such as intestines and bladder. This sets up, these actually migrate on our tissues. All right. So think about this. If this is in your intestines or it gets into your muscle tissue, it can cause some major, major problems. So pathology arises from worms feeding on or migrating through tissue. All right, and we're going to see coming up, you can have an accumulation of worms or worm products. So depending on your, they'll call it your worm load or intestinal load. If these are growing in your intestines, they can start binding it up where you actually have to go in and get them physically removed. All right. What we don't want is worms feeding on or migrating through tissues. We don't want them leaving. If they're in the GI tract, it's annoying, all right? But the minute they leave your GI tract, they're very, very hard to get rid of at that point. Because remember, these are huge, large eukaryotic cells. So even our eosinophils are going to have trouble getting rid of these. Right? And please remember, these worms, if they're living in your GI tract, they're consuming the food in your GI tract, but they're also giving off a lot of their own waste after they've digested the food or done whatever they want with it. So you also have that component in your GI tract causing a major amount of inflammation and irritability. So, you know, let's just say you had roundworms or tapeworms, you may start losing weight, all right? People say, well, the worms are eating all of my food. Well, they might be, but you also have an irritation component where they're excreting these enzymes, which is irritating the GI tract. So even with that inflammation, your microvilli are affected. And even if you are eating, you're not going to be able to absorb as much food, because if your microvilli are irritated or inflamed, you're going to have a lot less surface area for the food to be absorbed into the capillary beds. Diagnosis based on blood cell count. So once again, your eosinophils are going to be elevated. You can do serological testing for antigen antibodies. You know, they say I'd like a feces sample. We look for eggs, larvae, adult worms in the feces. Sputum, we have them cough it up. And I said some of these worms are going to migrate out of the GI tract into your capillary bed, go to your lungs as you cough it up. If we see that with sputum, we know that, all right, you had a worm load. They migrated out of your GI tract, got into your bloodstream, and now they're in your lungs. You're coughing them up. Right? Give me the urine, all right, blood, or tissue biopsies. Right? So some of these worms or tapeworms like to go to your diaphragm and other muscles. Right? So you can imagine how horrific that is if your diaphragm is full of these tapeworms. All right, anti-helminthic drugs suppress the helminthic metabolic process. So with the worms, we can literally go in and shut down their ability to metabolically be active. Right? So there are stages that are different in the worm and the humans. So we're going to focus on the differences, and we can find antimicrobials that work on shutting down the worm metabolic process that don't affect us. So the process is different. That's effective. If the same drug that breaks down the worm's metabolic process breaks down our metabolic process, now we have an issue. Right? We can go in and use antimicrobials that will stop the worm from being able to migrate or move. Right? That would help us if we can localize them. All right, we can get it to prevent it from holding position or attaching to the GI tract. So if we are drinking a lot of fluid or we have diarrhea, we can forcibly eject them out. You guys grossed out yet? No. All right. So the roundworms are the most abundant group. There's about 50 species that affect humans. We're only just talk about generally, all right? So these are elongated cylindrical worms with protective cuticles. So these are round worms. They usually are thick in the middle. They come to a pointed end, right? They have protective cuticles. So that's kind of like a waxy proteinous coating on them. So they're not affected by our stomach acids or any of our eosinophils. They're going to have a hard trouble getting through that shell, that protective coating. Right? They have circular muscles, right, for constriction, complex digestive tract, and they're separate sexes. So the roundworms have to have male and female. They're going to mate inside the GI tract and produce offspring. So we divide them into intestinal or tissue nematodes. So Ascarius lumbricoides, so these are huge. These are a large intestinal roundworm. Most cases in the US occur in the southeastern states. These are indigenous to humans, all right? So there are certain portions of the population that just have these, and even if they were to get rid of them, they re-inoculate themselves. Right? Ascarius spends its larval and adult stages in humans, releases embryonic eggs and feces, and are spread to other humans through drink and contaminated objects. So they're in the host. The host may or may not know they have them. They're going to excrete these larvae. And then we're going to hope that, the larvae are going to grow. They're going to release their eggs and feces. And then if we don't have sanitary conditions, or people don't wash their hands real well, or, God forbid, they're working in a restaurant and they have these under their nails or something, and they're processing touching your money or your food, because just even touching money, you can transmit these quickly. Ingested eggs hatch into larvae and burrow through the intestines into circulation.
How does it survive going through the stomach?
Well, the stomach acid, because the eggs are encoded to protect them in the environment, right? So they have like a calcium, not calcium carbonate, they have a calcium, I can't think of what it is, Bob, calcium something derivative around the egg to protect it in the environment. As you swallow it, that stomach acid literally digests that coating. Now they go into the duodenum fully enveloped.
Oh, okay.
So the worm wants you to swallow it, so it goes through your stomach, so that acid, kind of like if you put chalk in vinegar, or if you put, if you guys want to try this, take next time you have wings or whatever, put those chicken wings in some vinegar, leave them for a couple of days or a week, then pick the wing up and it'll be flexible. You've actually taken all the calcium out of that. All right, so that's kind of how the stomach acid works on these. Good question. But these literally, they travel to your lungs, and then you swallow them and start the whole process all over again. Right? And these things can produce 200,000 eggs a day. So imagine what would happen if you, let's say you had 10 of these things growing in your intestines. Right? You'd have a lot, 2 million eggs a day. So this is what they look like. We have jars of them at school, but I didn't want to bring them home to show you guys. Blech. So worms retain motility, they do not attach. Severe inflammatory reaction mark the migratory route. So remember, these things are consuming your intestinal content, but as they're living and metabolically, remember they have their own metabolic system. We can stop that hopefully with anti-helminthic medications, but they're also literally just like they eat and they excrete. So they're excreting their waste. That's going to start building up or irritating your microvilli in your lungs. Allergic reactions can occur. So imagine if you have that's a foreign protein, you're going to have allergic reaction. Once again, the inflammatory process is going to happen, makes the situation even worse. Heavy worm loads can retard physical and mental development. So if you have, let's say you're you're 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old and you have that many worms in your intestine, you're not going to be able to get enough. The food is not going to have any surface area for digestion. All right, so these people are not going to grow, failure to thrive. They're not going to be able to think. They're not going to have any glucose or fuel for the neurological system. All right, so those are roundworms. All right, so just kind of remember the process of the roundworms. All right, we're gonna be ingesting the eggs. They go through the stomach. They repopulate the lungs. All right, or once they're in the lungs, they can leave the digestive tract. That's how they get to the lungs. They go in the capillary bed. They go to your lungs, and we're hoping that you spit them out. Somewhere sanitary where someone doesn't pick them up, or the worm is hoping you swallow them and re-inoculate yourself. So with whipworms, we're the only host for this. So Trihurius has the highest incident in the tropics. Eggs hatch in the intestines. Now these larvae actually attach. Right? They penetrate the outer wall and develop into adults. Females lay all these eggs daily. Here's the problem with these, all right? These worms pierce the capillaries, causing local hemorrhage. It's a major problem. Heavy infestation can cause dysentery, rectal prolapse, and can be fatal in children. So whipworms are not as innocuous as even the roundworms are. All right, because these are gonna literally always want to leave the GI tract and get into your capillary beds. And this is gonna cause major hemorrhaging in the capillary beds. And we know if you have major hemorrhaging and the capillary beds don't repair themselves quickly, then every cell around is gonna go through hypoxia and major problems. Ischemia. So entero or vermiculus, right, means round, commonly known as a pinworm. Most common parasitic worm found in the United States. Humans are the only host for this species. Female pinworms deposit their eggs in the anus. Infections can be asymptomatic. Kids don't even know they have it. So there's going to be intense perianal itching, occurs if symptomatic. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Scotch tape test. So if you suspect that your child has this, in the morning you take Scotch tape, you put it on this, you pull it off, put the Scotch tape under the microscope, and you'll actually see this. Right. Identification of eggs or adult worms is diagnostic. Right. Preventing spread from infectious individuals so much disease. So literally, this is very common. Can be common in daycare centers or wherever children are. They're going to wake up. They're going to be itchy because the eggs are there. It's irritating. All right, it's under their fingernails. So now they go downstairs. They're kids. They open the cereal box with their hands. They fall in. Sister comes along, consumes them or whatever. Or kids, they don't wash their hands constantly. They scratch themselves. They stick their fingers in someone else's mouth, or they're touching other things that another sibling will come along and put in their mouth, or they can inoculate themselves by putting their hands in their mouth. So pinworm or seatworm, as I said, it's the most common disease in children in temperate zones. Eggs are picked up from surroundings and swallowed. After hatching in the small intestines, they develop into adults. Anal itching occurs when mature females emerge from the intestines and release the eggs. So at night, female travels down the rectum and deposits the eggs on the end of the rectum, hoping that somehow they'll get picked up by someone else. Self-inoculation is very common, and they use the tape test for that. Right? There's medications they give. It gets rid of this. So that's what they would have. We did it like put that on microscope slide after the tape was there. All right, let's talk about hookworms. So these guys are really, really nasty. Characteristic curved ends are in a hooked mouth. So these literally attach, okay? Nectar americanus and Cyclotoma duodenal. So just duodenal was from the duodenum, they got its name. Humans shed eggs and feces, which hatch into filarial-formed larvae and burrow into the skin and bare feet. So filarial are going to be very, very thin, like the filarial worm that causes elephantitis. So hookworms are the second most common nematode infection. And the two hookworms that infect humans are Encyclostoma duodenale and Nectar americanus. This is brought over from Europe. All right, and these guys, these are nasty. Right? Larvae burrow in soil through skin, travel to the heart, lungs, and eventually small intestines. All right. The adult worms, that's where I got this is Nectar americanus. It was like a vampire thing, they thought. Adult worms suck the blood of their host, causes chronic anemia, iron, and protein deficiency. So if you get a big enough load of these, they'll literally drain you. Like, imagine if they took a half a pint a day consumption. Imagine how tired you would be and how anemic you would be. Ground itch occurs at the site of larvae penetration. So you get bit by this, all right, it's going to leave a mark, and you're going to be itching it. All right, so that's what it looks like. All right, so imagine this thing literally attaches to your intestines. So larvae travel from blood to the lungs. So they pick them up on the ground. They travel, they get in your blood supply, they travel to the lungs, proceed up the bronchi to the throat and are swallowed. Now this is how they get in the digestive tract. Worms mature and reproduce in the small intestines, complete their cycle. All right, may cause pneumonia in the lungs, causing the inflammatory process, a lot of fluid, great for that. You guys remember what bacteria that causes that? The majority of it. Nausea, vomiting, cramps, and bloody diarrhea. So these are all symptoms as this worm travels from your feet, blood supply, lungs, you cough it up, and then you swallow it. Blood loss is significant, causing anemia. And you know, this can take half a pint to a pint of blood a day if you have a big enough load. All right. Let's talk about trichinosis. So life cycle is entirely within the mammalian host. So this thing, its life cycle is only in us. So larvae is encysted in animal muscle and are the infective stage. So we're going to get this from undercooked pork. We consume it. Right? When ingested, cysts hatch and mature in the intestinal lining. Right? Adults reproduce and form new larvae. These burrow through the intestines and enter the circulation. All right. This is not a good thing. So please make sure you're not eating raw pork. All right. And I don't know if you guys know anything about like kosher laws or in some countries where they just don't eat pork. All right. Because of the health hazards. But pork, we can eat it. I mean, who doesn't love bacon, right? All right, so you can eat pork, but make sure it is thoroughly cooked. Larvae eventually form cysts in skeletal muscle that can remain for years. Circle shows a biopsy of human skeletal muscle infected with the coiled Trigonella spiralis. Spiralis means spiral. That's in muscle tissue. So this isn't quite as bad as the pork tapeworm. All right, pork tapeworm does similar stuff, but the pork tapeworm really likes your diaphragm and ciliary muscle, some really important muscles. Right. Acquired from eating undercooked pork or bear meat. Right. You know, so they could, they could give you a case study about so-and-so avid hunter has a propensity for bear meat, and then he has all these symptoms, and like, oh, that's got to be trichinosis. Larvae migrate from the intestines to blood vessels, muscle, heart, and brain, where it forms cysts. And remember, once it's in your muscles, your heart, or your brain, heart and brain don't reproduce anyway. So once the damage is done, it's done. You can't really fix that. We can't get rid of it. First symptoms are flu-like and diarrhea. So you have this, you wouldn't even know you had it. It would be inconsequential. Second symptoms, muscle and joint pain as these things are traveling. Shortness of breath, pronounced eosinophilia. All right, shortness of breath can be from anemia, or if these things are migrating, remember your diaphragm is very, very thin, all right? So it's very easy for these things to start migrating to the diaphragm. And once they start migrating to the diaphragm, that muscle tissue is not going to be contracting properly, or if it is, it's going to be very, very rigid. The myosin cross-bridge action's not, it's going to be inhibited, all right? So you're going to have trouble in your diaphragm to contract. You're going to have trouble getting the tidal volume in and out of your lungs. Right? There's no cure after the larvae have encysted. So once it leaves and they've encysted into muscle, right, there's no cure. All right, so I think that is a video of a real science project where they put, they poured Pepsi onto pork chops, all right, and waited about 10 minutes, and literally the Pepsi ate the encystment, because Coke will clean your toilet or take the paint off your car. So if you put pork chops in Diet Pepsi, as it penetrates, it'll actually eat through the encystment process, and the larvae will come out of the pork chop, all right? So that should be in the PowerPoint if it plays on a non-Mac product. It's about 2 minutes, so it's a pretty cool little video. Okay, so nematodes, when you see this, these are going to be worms that they complete their life cycle in your blood, and then for skin. All right, so these are not going to be GI associated. Right. Malaria worms, when you see that, that's elephantitis. So it's going to jam up your lymph nodes, all right, and they're transmitted by the female Anopheles mosquito, just like malaria. These are injected, and the filaria worms get in your lymphatic tissue. They literally block your lymph nodes, and if you think about that, if you've ever seen elephantitis, you have no way of filtering that lymphatic fluid we talked about in the particular endothelial system. We talked about that. They're jammed up. So all that fluid information is going to pool. There's no way to get it back to the thoracic duct or the left or the right subclavian. There's no way to recirculate that. It causes a major problem. Causes chronic deforming disease. Wucheria bancroffi causes elephantitis. It's a sign of, that's the name of it. Onchocercia bovitis is river blindness. Right, they're going to be carried by black flies. Right. The lower worm migrates into your eye. Right, and I don't think it'll play. Hopefully, it'll play in your PowerPoint. There's a video of a woman who had this. It's causing major neurological disturbances, headaches, flashes of blindness, and the doctor literally had to go in and cut the sclera and pull out a 7-inch lower worm. Now, in his defense, the woman, if you watch the whole video, she was a complete idiot. She did nothing about this for months. She blacked out. She had migraine. She almost wrecked her car and stuff from this worm being in her eye, but she did nothing about it. So filarial worms or elephantitis, tropical infection spread by mosquitoes. Female Anopheles mosquitoes is the most common vector for that. Vector deposits larvae which move into lymphatics and develop into be adults. And so the larvae, they go into your lymphatic system and they actually develop into adults in the lymph node. Chronic infection causes blockage of lymphatic circulation and elephantitis, massive swelling of the extremities. Transmitted by the Crulex or Anopheles mosquito. Mosquito ingests microfilaria when feeding on the human. Humans then transmit the parasite to a new individual. Remains asymptomatic for years, and lymphatic damage causes elephantitis with that. So there's a person, I think that's a male. He does have a little cigarette. He's trying to kill the worms. All right, but with this, must have been the microfilaria were in the system, all right? And usually it's going to go to the legs because if they're bitten down here, your legs, if they're not real active, there's no way of pumping that lymphatic fluid up quickly. Right, so the lymphatic, it got jammed up in the lower lymphatics, right? The larvae turned into the filaria worm. In the lower legs, the lymphatic fluid, so now, or lymphatic nodes. So now all this lymphatic fluid from the capillary beds that didn't get returned through hydrostatic pressure or oncotic pressure, that diffusion has no way of getting recirculating back to the heart with this. So there's another picture.
Is that reversible?
Nope, because they'd have to literally cut out all the lymph nodes.
Damn.
Yeah, that's a big foot. That's like a baby rhino. Yeah. At least your nails are done, all right?
Oh yeah, you gotta think about the picture.
The bling, yeah. All right, so that's what they look like. So just kind of imagine, and you guys haven't done a cadaver dissection yet, or maybe you have, all right? But the lymph nodes in the legs and arms are not that large, all right? So imagine the larvae in there, they're growing, and then they grow into adults in the lymph nodes. It's going to jam up, because remember, there's a bunch of afferent vessels going in to the lymph node, and there's only one efferent going out. Well, if this thing blocks the exit to the efferent vessel, we have no way of getting fluid to leave that nodule. So if it's one nodule, not a huge problem, but the problem is if it starts, if these larvae infect more than one nodule or nodules to that entire extremity. Right. So river blindness is transmitted by there's going to be black flies. Larvae develop in adults in the subcutaneous tissue. Right, so under cutaneous, subcutaneous, a little bit deeper. Adult females migrate via the blood to the eyes. All right, so you're going to be bit somewhere, goes into your basement membrane, then into your capillary bed. It's going to migrates to the eyes, provoking inflammatory reaction. Right? And just remember, the eyes are going to be very, very. They're still in the body, but they're relatively superficial. So it's going to be cooler area because you're constantly blinking. There's constantly air circulating, so of all the places, it's gonna find that fluid in the eyes to be a really good temperature for them.
Is that for like around here too, like black flies?
No, I think this it wouldn't be the black. I think these are biting black flies are more like Mississippi.
I don't know if you go to the Adirondacks like early spring.
I don't.
The black flies are awful up there.
Yeah, but I think it gets too cold here if they can't survive the winter.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure it's in the like the Delta Basin of the Mississippi and that area down there. All right, lower worm is spread by small flies. All right. Another thing, temperature sensitive worm migrates around and under the skin and may enter the eye. All right. So pull worm from a small hole in the conjunctiva. All right. So literally, there's other things where they cut a small incision, and way back in the day, they used to have to take like the where you thread a needle and they'd hook it on there and they'd have to slowly rotate that needle and kind of wrap it around the needle and pull it out. All right. But these things can get 5, 6, 7, 8 inches long if they're untreated. All right. Let's talk about some flukes, and we should be getting done pretty soon, I think. All right, flukes are flatworms with ovoid leaf-like bodies. All right, so these are like Chinese liver flukes, or these are going to live in, usually going to live in some kind of seafood or something. All right, so make sure if you're getting sushi or whatever, that it is radiated or something where they're treating this. Okay, so these have digestive, excretory, neuromuscular, and reproductive systems. So these are really, really advanced. These lack circulatory and respiratory systems, so they need us for that part of the life cycle. Animals such as snails or fish are usually intermediate hosts, and humans are the definitive host. So we're generally going to consume this, or the snails are going to be part of the life process. Snails are going to lay some kind of larvae on grasses or something. Fish are going to come along and eat, be exposed to that, eat part of it, and then we consume the raw fish. We can get this. Schistosomiasis is prominent parasitic disease. So these are schistosomes. Schistosome monosauri is what we're going to be talking about here. So adult flukes live in humans and release eggs into the water. So this, used to happen in China when they used to use human feces for fertilizer. So the adult flukes live in the humans who release eggs into the water. So, through some kind of sanitation process, whether they're going in an outhouse or a hole they dug, or they're literally defecating in an open field, gets in the water, all right? The early larvae develop in the freshwater snail into the second larvae. All right, and this is where we literally pick them up with our feet. The larvae penetrates human skin and moves into the mature liver to mature. Adults migrate in the intestines or bladder. So they shed their eggs, giving rise to chronic organ enlargement. So, with this case, humans carry it, they excrete it, and then they're walking around either bare feet or sandals or something where the larvae would be able to penetrate the human skin. And we think, well, that's impossible. But these larvae are very, very tiny. All they do is find a small crack in your skin, and they just follow it in. Right? They're going to migrate into your bloodstream, go to the intestines or bladder, and they shed eggs. Okay, so liver flukes, they cycle between mammals and snails and fish. Humans are infected by eating inadequately cooked fish containing the eggs and larvae. Larvae crawl into the bile duct, mature in eggs and feces. Snails are infected. So this is where you got this from eating sushi, Chinese liver flukes or whatever. We're going to consume this. They're going to crawl into our bile duct, liver into the bile duct. They live there, protected, all right? And then we shed eggs into feces. And snails are infected. So every time you eat a fatty meal or whatever, and your duodenum signals your gallbladder to contract, we release eggs in our feces, and we complete that entire cycle. Falcicola hepatica cycles between herbivores, right? Snails, and aquatic plants. Humans are infected by eating raw aquatic plants. Flukes lodges in the liver. So these used to be called Chinese liver flukes themselves, because hepto means liver. So this is from eating like, what's that stuff they put in sushi? I can't think of what the grass is called. I can't think of it. But a lot of those, it's like some form of seaweed they put with sushi. All right, so it can be on that. All right, so lung flukes, Westermani. So these, if they ask you something about lung flukes, Paragonymous Westermani is the name. That's what they're looking for. Cycles between carnivore animals, snails, crustaceans. Humans are infected by eating undercooked crustaceans. So that'd be lobster, whatever. Intestinal worms migrate to the lungs. So they'll give you some case scenario where someone was having, could be coughing up blood of unknown reason, no prior respiratory illnesses. They were coughing and there was a small bit of bloody mucus or whatever. And then they would do a history, you know, history reveals something about the person ate. We figure out somehow they were eating, they work in under-eaten crustaceans or lobster or something with that. So I think the last thing we should be talking about are the tapeworms. I think it's the last thing. All right. So these are cestose. This is going to be very, very flat. Okay. So these are called tapeworms. These are flat, segmented intestinal parasites. All tapeworms lack digestive systems, so they literally have to take whatever you're digesting right in for consumption. All possess the same general body plan. All right, so that's kind of what they look like. All right, so here's the scolex. So this is what literally attaches to your intestine. So as these things grow, like you just take in one of these glottids or gravid segments, all you need is one of these, you ingest it, it turns into the, you know, it grows, it has a scolex. As it grows, it's gonna be growing these segments. It just drops off these segments continuously. It's hoping that someone's going to pick one of these up somehow, consume it, and then we start reproducing a tapeworm all over again. Okay, so that's the scolex. All right, so this says hook. So this thing is literally attaching to your digestive system. All right, growing all these segments or strobi. It's dropping off these glottis or segments, hoping that someone consumes it. So I'm going to say a couple things here. If you're going to get a tapeworm, you want the beef tapeworm. The beef tapeworm will not leave your digestive tract. The pork tapeworm migrates out of your intestinal system and it will insist, like trichomonas, into your muscle tissue. And once it does, we have no way of getting rid of it. All right. So eggs and egg-filled proglottids, right, are passed in the environment in feces. Intermediate hosts ingest eggs on contaminated food. Eggs hatch into larvae that penetrate intestinal wall and migrate to other tissues. So now this larvae is developing cisternus and muscle. Humans consume this in undercooked contaminated meat, right? Gets in our digestive system, right, and can circulate, right? But like I said, with pork tapeworms, once they're in the digestive system, they can actually leave and migrate. All right, so we have two forms. Stagnata, beef, salarium is the pork tapeworm. Right. So beef tapeworm is very large. Humans are a definitive host. Right? So that's what it can look like, and it's dropping off these little segments constantly. Right? And there's the scolex, right, which is attaching to this. All right, so let's say you have one of these. Either you got one not on purpose, or you wanted to drop a lot of weight very quickly for something. You ordered one of these online. Please make sure it is a beef tapeworm, because these don't leave the digestive tract, and there's medication we can take. And to make sure it's gone, you actually have to go through the feces until you find this guy. You go through all the feces and you don't find the scolex, it's still there. You got to start the medication all over again. Right? All right. So Stagnata is the beef tapeworm. Solium is the pork tapeworm. Cattle and swine serve as intermediate hosts. Right? Humans living close to livestock or with inadequate sewage treatment have the highest incidence of infection. Adults attached to your intestinal epithelium. Most individuals strad the glottis or strobia, that segment, without having symptoms. Intestinal blockage can occur if the tapeworm is very, very large. Right? So if it's very, very large and it's coiled up in there, it can cause a blockage. So you'd notice, you know, you wouldn't be able to eat, or you'd be throwing up. You have to go in and have it, it's impacted if they're going to have it removed. Diagnosis based on identification of the proglottids or the strobi in the fecal samples. Prevention relies on properly cooking or freezing meat. You could freeze meat for a long period of time, like pork chops or whatever. Ham usually comes fully smoked. All right, we'll do that. But with pork, just make sure it's cooked all the way. And beef, generally, we wouldn't have a problem in this region because a lot of our meat doesn't come from food lots. But there are some people who like to eat raw beef, or very rare beef. All right, so here's the beef tapeworm. I'm just going in showing you eating raw beef. The larvae formed. The larva attaches to the small intestine and becomes an adult. Very few symptoms, because it's not going to consume a whole lot. Because he's growing in there, dropping off these proglottid, the strobi, the segments, hoping that cattle come along and eat again, or humans come along and eat it again, and restart the whole cycle for them. All right, here's a problem. Pork tapeworm, same thing. All right, most damaging if they lodge in the heart, eye, or brain, may cause seizures, psychiatric disturbances. All right, not a problem here. All right, but we realize in like Texas or places that are close to Mexico, or places that would, I shouldn't say Mexico, but any place that had feedlots where there was a huge amount of pigs and maybe they weren't the cleanest, you may have a problem with this. So there was an issue a while back. People, I think it was not Texas, somewhere that was close to Mexico, they were importing these swine or the pork, and they weren't cooking it completely, and there was a episode of this. So this is what they actually look like. And so this is pork. All right, you wouldn't really see this, but I'm telling you, there's a video, I hope it plays for you guys. But if you pour Pepsi or Coke on this, it'll start eating away at this, and you'll actually see larvae coming out. Right. This is right here. That's not normal. All right. So that is where it was growing, lodging into the neurological tissue, causing major neurological damage. And remember, you guys know this, central nervous system does not regenerate, and your astrocytes and glial cells are not going to be able to handle that. Oh. All right, so if you guys get to this video, there's literally a picture of them pulling a tapeworm out of someone's nose, and literally they were pulling it out, and this thing was probably about 3 feet long. Right. Pretty gross. All right. So, you know, if I ask you guys a question on the last exam about, you know, we talked about some of these vectors. All right, ticks, fleas, lice, or whatever they happen to be. I'm just going to ask you that. And remember, the biological vectors, these are medical importance, transmit infectious microbes in the process of feeding. So they're just feeding. They don't care about whatever is in there. They just want the blood meal, and they just happen to be, re-injecting that into the next host. So they're just a biological vector. Okay. So there's just showing you a breakdown of mosquitoes, fleas, and lice. We talked about this with scrub typhus. Remember, we talked about that with some of the other things. Relapsing fever, epidemic typhus. And there's some ticks, all right? So please be careful with ticks this season if you're out hiking, all right? So it's gonna be possibly painful itching or not. So you really should have someone check your back or any place you can't see, because about, I don't know if I told you guys, like maybe 6 weeks ago, I had this like pain on my shoulder blade, my scapula, and I couldn't imagine what the hell it was. And I asked them, I go, "Did you look at my shoulder?" And the person was like, "Oh my God, I think it's a tick." So I'm like, "You gotta be effing kidding me." So I got them to get tweezers and rotate it and pull it out, and there was a little tiny tick. Now, if I had someone check that, I mean, the thing was like this big, tiniest thing ever. So now just go in and check that out. We're probably not going to be, a huge issue here, but please realize even in West Seneca, Orchard Park, or wherever you guys are living, Cheektowaga, there are deer, so the possibility is there. All right, so remember, they transmit a lot of those rickettsial diseases. All right, I think that's it, guys. It took me forever to get through all that. Almost 7 o'clock. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Okay, so guys, any questions at all that you can think of?
I don't think so.
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, so tonight I have another lecture from 7 to 9. I got something else going on. So I will work on your last exam tonight. I'll pop that in. Your lab practical I probably won't get to, honestly, until the morning because I'm already exhausted. And then, like I said, the course ends tomorrow at 11:59 roughly, but I'm pretty sure we have literally, I'm almost 100% positive we have till Monday for you guys to have access. So not a problem. But if anything else comes up that I've missed or whatever, please email me. If I don't get back to you, it's because I missed it. All right. I want to thank you guys for signing in and watching and participating. All right. So any questions, let me know. I don't know what you guys need next semester. I think I know I'm doing nutrition online. I'm not quite sure about pathophysiology yet. And I haven't got the okay for pharmacology yet. So, but you guys have my email. If you need anything in the future, just let me know.
Great.
All right.
Thanks, Dr. Phil.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
guys.
This is interesting.
Well, it's a lot. I mean,
Interesting and gross, but it's,
really
I
mean
like it. Yeah, I've always liked the parasites.
yeah, and I kind of rushed through them. There's a lot to remember, but just really, I'm only gonna test you on the facts or what I think they're going to ask you or what I've seen in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to expect you to remember all the life cycles. It's just way too much, unimportant. But read the book if you want. PowerPoint just kind of keep me on track. But any questions, just ask. All right, guys.
All right, thanks.
All right, have a great.
Thanks, Dr. Phil.
Have a great fall, anyway. All right.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
See you, Dr. Phil.
Hi, Robert. Text me if you need anything.
Sure will.